Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Summary and analysis by Brevreds. Introduction. Ego is that subtle voice in your head that whispers, "You're the best. You've made it." It pushes you to demand recognition and convinces you that you deserve more. But ego also blinds you, dulls your potential, and can lead to your downfall if you're not careful. Ego is the Enemy is about understanding how ego operates in our lives and how to combat it, no matter where you are, on the rise, in the midst of success, or facing failure. This book isn't just a self-help guide, it's a manual for navigating life without letting ego sabotage your progress. In a world that constantly tells you to believe in yourself and always be confident, this book reveals the hidden dangers of inflated self-importance. Confidence is necessary, yes, but unchecked ego? That's where things fall apart. To truly achieve greatness, we must learn to get out of our own way. Part 1. Aspire. 1. The humble student, learning before you leap. Before you can even begin to rise, you have to learn. And that means adopting the mindset of a student. The moment you think you already know enough is the moment your growth stops. Ego tells us that we're already equipped for greatness, that we're special, that we're the exception to the rule. But reality says otherwise. Take General George C. Marshall, a U.S. Army officer who went on to become one of the most respected military leaders in history. Before he achieved greatness, Marshall understood the importance of preparation. When he was a young officer, he wasn't in a rush to climb the ranks. Instead, he made it a point to learn from everyone around him. Rather than pushing for promotions, he accepted lowly assignments and focused on becoming the best soldier he could be. He observed, he studied, he was patient. In one story, Marshall was offered a promotion to a prestigious position. His peers expected him to leap at the opportunity, but Marshall turned it down. Why? He felt he wasn't ready yet. This decision shocked everyone around him. Who turns down a promotion, right? But Marshall understood something critical. It wasn't about titles or climbing the ladder quickly. He valued competence over status. By rejecting the promotion and choosing to continue learning, he eventually rose far higher than he would have if he had allowed his ego to push him forward too soon. His rise came not from self-promotion, but from the constant pursuit of improvement. Later in life, when asked about his success, he said it wasn't his brilliance or charm that propelled him forward, but his dedication to mastering the fundamentals and never assuming he knew it all. For us, Marshall's story is a reminder, no matter how skilled we think we are, there is always more to learn. Never assume you've mastered anything. Stay humble, stay open, and be willing to accept that you're still in the early stages of growth, no matter where you are in life. 2. The dangers of self-promotion. We live in a world where self-promotion is not only encouraged but expected. Social media is filled with people showing off their accomplishments, their highlight reels, and their achievements. But constantly putting yourself on a pedestal is one of the fastest ways to let ego take over. The more you talk about what you're going to do, the less likely you are to actually do it. William Tecumseh Sherman, another well-known general from the American Civil War, embodied the opposite approach. Unlike many others in his position, Sherman wasn't interested in promoting himself or seeking out glory. In fact, he avoided it. While other military leaders made speeches, sought praise, and postured for more powerful positions, Sherman focused on the task at hand. After the war, Sherman was repeatedly offered the chance to become President of the United States, a dream job for any ambitious man of the time. But Sherman shocked everyone by refusing the position outright, stating, "I will not accept if nominated and will not serve if elected." This wasn't false modesty. Sherman genuinely didn't want the distractions that came with fame and political power. He wanted to continue serving in the military, where he could make a real difference. Sherman's humility and focus allowed him to be one of the most effective military commanders of his time. His decision to shun the spotlight wasn't about rejecting success, but about understanding what truly mattered. Ego, on the other hand, would have pushed him into a role where he wasn't suited, potentially undoing all of the good he had achieved. We can learn from Sherman's example, avoid the temptation of chasing recognition and status. Instead, focus on doing meaningful work and let your achievements speak for themselves. Real success doesn't require constant validation from others. It just requires doing the work and staying grounded. 3. Katharine Graham and the burden of leading. When we think of powerful leaders, we often think of people who boldly take charge, speak with authority, and command respect. But true leadership requires something different: the ability to set aside ego and make decisions that are best for the collective good, even when it means putting your own desires or reputation aside. Consider Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post during one of its most turbulent times. Graham didn't start out as a confident leader. In fact, when she took over the paper after her husband's suicide, she was terrified. She had spent most of her life in the background, supporting her husband's career, and now she was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. She was expected to lead one of the country's most important newspapers in an era of great political turmoil. Graham could have let her insecurities and ego paralyze her. She could have played it safe, avoided tough decisions, or stepped down. But instead, she embraced the challenges, despite feeling out of her depth. When the Washington Post got hold of the Pentagon Papers, a classified government study that revealed shocking secrets about the Vietnam War, Graham was faced with a monumental decision. Should she publish the papers and risk the wrath of the U.S. government, or should she hold back and play it safe? Ego would have pushed her to avoid the controversy. It would have told her to protect her reputation and stay out of harm's way. But Graham chose courage over ego. She made the decision to publish the papers, a move that put her paper at the center of one of the biggest political battles in U.S. history. This decision didn't just take bravery, it took humility. Graham wasn't a career journalist or a seasoned publisher. She could have easily let her insecurities take over. But by setting aside her ego, she was able to focus on what truly mattered: the pursuit of truth and the role of the press in holding power accountable. Graham's story teaches us that real leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or demanding respect. It's about making difficult choices, even when it's uncomfortable, and putting the greater good above your own ego. Part 2, Success. 4. When you've made it. Success is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's the ultimate goal. On the other, it's where ego thrives. When we achieve success, we start to believe we deserve it, that we're special, and that our work is done. But success is fragile, and if we let ego run the show, it can all come crashing down. Take the case of John DeLorean, the brilliant engineer and businessman who became a household name in the 1970s. DeLorean was a man of immense talent, responsible for the creation of iconic cars like the Pontiac GTO and the DeLorean DMC-12, famously featured in Back to the Future. He was innovative, charismatic, and driven. Everything you'd expect from a successful entrepreneur. But as DeLorean's fame grew, so did his ego. He began to see himself as untouchable, believing that his past successes justified his increasingly reckless decisions. He spent lavishly, chased ambitious projects that had little chance of success, and alienated those who tried to offer him advice. In 1982, DeLorean's empire came crashing down. His car company was failing, and in a desperate attempt to save it, he became involved in a drug trafficking scheme. He was arrested in an FBI sting operation, and though he was eventually acquitted, his reputation was ruined and his company collapsed. DeLorean's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting success go to your head. Ego convinced him that he was above the rules, that he could do no wrong. But success is never permanent, and the moment you stop working for it is the moment it starts to slip away. The lesson here? Success doesn't mean you've arrived. It's not an endpoint, it's a constant journey. Stay humble, keep learning, and never let ego make you believe you're invincible. 5. Howard Hughes and the Descent into Madness. Success can be intoxicating. It can make you feel invincible, like the rules don't apply to you. But ego, unchecked, can turn success into a personal prison. Few stories illustrate this as dramatically as the life of Howard Hughes, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in American history. Hughes was a genius, a brilliant engineer, filmmaker, and aviator. In the 1930s and 1940s, he was riding high, building an empire that spanned Hollywood and the aerospace industry. He produced some of the biggest movies of the time, set airspeed records, and made a name for himself as a daring innovator. But as his fame grew, so did his ego. He began to see himself as someone who didn't need to play by the same rules as everyone else. He started isolating himself, surrounding himself only with people who would agree with him and feed his delusions of grandeur. His projects became increasingly erratic. He spent millions on ambitious but impractical ideas like the infamous Spruce Goose, a giant wooden airplane that, despite its size and cost, only flew once. Eventually, Hughes's paranoia took over completely. He locked himself in hotel rooms for months on end, terrified of germs and convinced that everyone was out to get him. He demanded total control over his empire, but refused to listen to anyone's advice. By the time of his death, Hughes had completely withdrawn from public life, living as a recluse in his own mind, his empire crumbling around him. Hughes's tragic downfall is a powerful reminder that success can be a trap. Ego can distort reality, convincing you that your success is permanent and that you're immune to failure. But in reality, success is fragile, and the moment you stop learning, questioning yourself, and engaging with the world around you, you begin to fall. The takeaway is simple: success should never be a reason to stop being curious or to stop growing. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, and never think you've made it. No matter how high you climb, there's always more to learn. 6. Bill Belichick and the relentless pursuit of improvement. On the flip side of the dangers of success lies the story of Bill Belichick, the legendary coach of the New England Patriots, and how he avoided the traps that snare so many after they've achieved greatness. Belichick is one of the most successful coaches in NFL history, but what sets him apart isn't just his talent for coaching, it's his relentless focus on improvement and his refusal to let ego get in the way. Belichick's career didn't start with immediate success. He bounced around various coaching positions for years before getting his big break. But when he finally became head coach of the Patriots, he didn't rest on his laurels. Instead, he worked harder than ever, constantly studying film, analyzing every game, and seeking ways to improve, even when his team was already winning. One of Belichick's most famous quotes is, "Do your job." It's a simple mantra, but it encapsulates his philosophy: focus on the task at hand, execute it to the best of your ability, and leave ego out of it. Belichick doesn't care about flashy plays or individual accolades. He cares about winning, and he knows that the key to winning is doing the small things right, day in and day out. In fact, one of the most remarkable things about Belichick is his willingness to make tough decisions that might seem unpopular or even ego-deflating. For example, in 2001, he made the bold decision to bench his star quarterback, Drew Bledsoe, in favor of an unproven backup named Tom Brady. At the time, it seemed like a crazy move, but Belichick's decision paid off. Brady went on to lead the Patriots to multiple Super Bowl victories. Belichick's story teaches us that success isn't about ego or fame. It's about doing the work and never being satisfied with the status quo. No matter how much you've achieved, there's always room for improvement. And sometimes, the key to staying successful is making the difficult, ego-crushing decisions that others wouldn't dare to make. 7. Angela Merkel, silent leadership. In a world filled with loud leaders and self-promotion, Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, stands out as a different kind of leader. She rose to power in one of the world's most powerful nations, but she did it without fanfare, without bombastic speeches, and without seeking the spotlight. Merkel's quiet leadership is the antithesis of ego-driven success, and her story shows us that real power doesn't always come from being the loudest voice in the room. When Merkel first entered politics, she was an outsider, an East German scientist with little political experience. But she quickly rose through the ranks, not because she was flashy or charismatic, but because she was competent, diligent, and focused on the work. Merkel didn't seek the spotlight, she sought results. Throughout her time as chancellor, Merkel was known for her calm, measured approach. She didn't make grand promises or engage in political theater. Instead, she focused on practical solutions to complex problems, earning the respect of her colleagues and the trust of the German people. One of the most telling aspects of Merkel's leadership style is how she handled crises. During the Eurozone crisis, when many European leaders were panicking and scrambling to protect their own interests, Merkel remained calm and focused on finding a solution that would benefit the entire continent. She didn't seek personal credit or try to boost her own image. Instead, she worked quietly behind the scenes, negotiating deals and building consensus. Merkel's leadership is a powerful reminder that ego is not a requirement for success. In fact, the most effective leaders are often those who put their egos aside and focus on the greater good. Merkel didn't need to be the center of attention, she let her work speak for itself. For us, Merkel's story teaches that success doesn't always require being loud or attention-seeking. Sometimes the most powerful leaders are the ones who lead quietly, with humility and a focus on results rather than recognition. Part 3. Failure. 8. The fall of BlackBerry. Ego blinds us to change. One of the most glaring examples of ego leading to failure is the story of BlackBerry, once the undisputed king of the smartphone market. In the early 2000s, BlackBerry was the go-to device for professionals, with its iconic physical keyboard and secure email services. It seemed untouchable, but success bred complacency, and ego blinded the company's leaders to the changes happening in the industry. When Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007, BlackBerry executives dismissed it as a gimmick. They believed that their dominance in the corporate market would protect them from any real competition. After all, they had the best product, the best security, and the most loyal customers. Why would anyone want a touchscreen phone with no physical keyboard? But BlackBerry's leaders failed to see the bigger picture. The smartphone market was changing, and consumer preferences were shifting rapidly. Apple understood that people wanted more than just a phone. They wanted a device that could do it all: browse the web, play music, take photos, and run apps. BlackBerry, on the other hand, stubbornly clung to its outdated model, believing that its existing success would carry it through. By the time BlackBerry realized its mistake, it was too late. Apple and Android had taken over the market, and BlackBerry's once loyal customers had moved on. The company, which had once been worth billions, saw its market share evaporate, and it never fully recovered. BlackBerry's downfall is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ego in the face of change. When we're successful, it's easy to believe that we've figured it all out. But the world is constantly evolving, and if we let ego convince us that we don't need to adapt, we'll be left behind. The lesson? Never get too comfortable. Stay curious, stay open to new ideas, and never assume that your past success guarantees future success. 9. The Wright brothers, humble pioneers of flight. Contrast BlackBerry's story with that of Orville and Wilbur Wright, the humble pioneers of flight. The Wright brothers didn't have degrees from prestigious universities, and they weren't part of the scientific establishment. In fact, many people at the time dismissed them as amateurs, but it was precisely their humility and lack of ego that allowed them to achieve what so many others had failed to do. The Wright brothers approached the problem of flight with curiosity and a willingness to learn. They didn't care about making grand claims or seeking fame, they were simply obsessed with solving the problem. They spent years meticulously studying aerodynamics, building and testing prototypes, and learning from their failures. What set the Wright brothers apart from their more famous contemporaries, like Samuel Langley, was their willingness to admit what they didn't know. Langley, who had the backing of the US government and the scientific community, believed that his success was inevitable. He spent a fortune building a massive flying machine, confident that it would work because of his reputation and resources. But Langley's ego blinded him to the flaws in his design. When his machine crashed spectacularly into the Potomac River, he refused to acknowledge that his approach was wrong. Meanwhile, the Wright brothers, working in obscurity and with limited funds, continued to refine their designs based on trial and error. In 1903, they achieved the first powered flight, a feat that Langley had failed to accomplish despite his resources. The Wright brothers' story shows us that humility is a powerful asset in the pursuit of success. They didn't let ego get in the way of learning, and that's what enabled them to achieve something truly revolutionary. In our own lives, we can learn from the Wright brothers by embracing humility, staying open to feedback, and recognizing that we don't have all the answers. The moment we stop learning is the moment we start failing. 10. John DeLorean, the downfall of an automaking legend. John DeLorean was a legend in the auto industry. He rose through the ranks at General Motors, becoming one of the youngest division heads in the company's history. He was the visionary behind some of the most iconic cars of the 1960s and 1970s, like the Pontiac GTO and the Firebird. With his good looks, charm, and knack for innovation, DeLorean seemed destined for greatness. But as his star rose, so did his ego, and that would ultimately be his downfall. DeLorean eventually grew tired of GM's corporate structure. He wanted to do things his way, and he believed he could build a car that would revolutionize the industry. So he left GM and started his own company, the DeLorean Motor Company. His dream car was the DMC-12, a sleek, futuristic sports car with gull-wing doors and a stainless steel body. It was a bold, ambitious project, and it was also plagued with problems from the start. DeLorean's ego convinced him that his car would sell purely because of its design and his name. He ignored warnings from engineers and advisors about the car's mechanical flaws. The DMC-12 was underpowered, overpriced, and riddled with quality issues. But DeLorean was determined to push it to market, believing that his reputation alone would be enough to guarantee success. By the early 1980s, DeLorean's company was in serious financial trouble. He was desperate to keep it afloat, but instead of acknowledging his mistakes and seeking help, his ego led him down a dark path. In 1982, DeLorean was arrested in an FBI sting operation for attempting to smuggle cocaine to fund his struggling company. Although he was eventually acquitted, the scandal destroyed his reputation, and the DeLorean Motor Company went bankrupt. DeLorean's story is a sobering reminder that ego can lead even the most talented and successful people to make disastrous decisions. When we let ego convince us that we're invincible or that we can bend the rules, we set ourselves up for failure. The lesson here is clear: don't let your ego blind you to reality. Success comes from hard work, humility, and a willingness to listen to others, not from believing your own hype. 11. The tragic case of Patton and the costs of ego in war. Few military leaders are as iconic as General George S. Patton. Known for his bold tactics and fiery personality, Patton was one of the most successful generals of World War II. His leadership was instrumental in the Allied victory, and his aggressive strategies helped turn the tide of the war in Europe. But Patton's ego also got the better of him, and it nearly cost him everything. Patton was brilliant, but he was also brash and often reckless. He was known for making controversial statements and clashing with his superiors. In the heat of battle, his boldness was often an asset, but in the political landscape of post-war Europe, it became a liability. After the war, Patton was put in charge of the occupation of Bavaria, a region in Germany. But instead of focusing on rebuilding and fostering peace, Patton's ego led him to make inflammatory comments about the Soviet Union, calling them the next enemy. He also made insensitive remarks about Nazi officials, suggesting that they should be kept in power to help rebuild Germany. These comments infuriated his superiors, who were trying to maintain delicate diplomatic relations with the Soviets. Patton's inability to control his ego ultimately led to his downfall. He was relieved of his command and sidelined, his career effectively over. Despite his military genius, Patton's ego prevented him from adapting to the new realities of peacetime leadership. The story of General Patton is a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting ego cloud your judgment. Even the most talented and successful leaders can be undone by their inability to control their ego. In life, just like in war, sometimes the greatest victories come not from aggression or boldness, but from humility and restraint. 12. The legend of Genghis Khan, ego as a tool for greatness. Genghis Khan, the Mongolian warlord who built one of the largest empires in history, might seem like an odd example in a book about controlling ego. After all, he was a ruthless conqueror who ruled through fear and domination. But the story of Genghis Khan actually shows us that ego can be a tool when it's kept in check. Genghis Khan wasn't born into greatness. He grew up in poverty, a member of a small, nomadic tribe. But from a young age, he had a powerful vision of uniting the Mongol tribes and creating a vast empire. Unlike many of the figures we've discussed, Genghis Khan didn't let his ego get in the way of that goal. He was pragmatic and disciplined, always focusing on what was necessary to achieve his vision. One of the most remarkable things about Genghis Khan's leadership was his ability to set aside personal grudges and work with former enemies. He understood that building an empire required alliances, and he was willing to make peace with those who had wronged him in the past if it served his larger goal. This kind of humility and long-term thinking is the opposite of ego-driven decision-making. At the same time, Genghis Khan wasn't without ego. He had an enormous sense of ambition and self-belief. But unlike someone like John DeLorean or Howard Hughes, he didn't let that ego blind him to reality. He was willing to adapt, to learn from his mistakes, and to change his tactics when necessary. The lesson here is that ego, when properly controlled, can be a powerful motivator. It can give you the confidence and drive to achieve great things. But when ego becomes an obstacle, when it prevents you from seeing the truth or accepting feedback, it becomes dangerous. Like Genghis Khan, we should strive to balance ambition with humility. 13. The Tale of Ulysses S. Grant, Overcoming Ego to Achieve Greatness. Ulysses S. Grant is a fascinating figure in American history. He started as a failed businessman and an unremarkable soldier, but by the end of the Civil War, he was a national hero and the commanding general of the Union Army. Grant's story is one of perseverance, but more importantly, it's a story of how he overcame his ego to achieve greatness. Early in his career, Grant struggled with alcohol and self-doubt. His early failures could have easily led him to give up, but instead of letting his ego dictate his response, he faced his weaknesses head-on. He didn't try to hide his flaws or pretend they didn't exist, he worked to overcome them. When Grant was given command of the Union Army, he faced enormous pressure. The war was going badly for the North, and the country was desperate for a leader who could turn things around. Grant didn't have the polished reputation of other generals, but he had something more important: the ability to put his ego aside and focus on the mission. One of Grant's defining moments came during the siege of Vicksburg, a crucial battle in the Civil War. The Union had been trying to capture Vicksburg for months, but the Confederate defenses were too strong. Other generals might have been content to keep their distance and wait for reinforcements, but Grant took a different approach. He wasn't afraid to take risks, and he wasn't concerned with how it might affect his personal reputation. He launched a bold, all-out assault on the city, and after weeks of brutal fighting, Vicksburg fell. It was a turning point in the war. Grant's ability to put his ego aside and focus on the bigger picture was one of the reasons he was so successful. He didn't care about personal glory, he cared about winning the war. In his memoirs, Grant famously said, "I have never advocated war except as a means of peace." Grant's story teaches us that true greatness comes from overcoming ego, not giving in to it. By acknowledging his flaws and focusing on the mission, Grant was able to achieve lasting success, not just for himself, but for the entire nation. Conclusion: how to apply these lessons. Now that we've explored stories of both failure and triumph, it's time to think about how these lessons can be applied to your life. You may not be leading armies or empires, but the principles of controlling your ego are universal. Here's how you can take action. Practice humility every day. Recognize that no matter how much you achieve, there's always more to learn. Surround yourself with people who will challenge you, and be open to feedback, even when it's uncomfortable. Stay focused on the bigger picture. Don't let short-term success inflate your ego. Stay grounded and keep your eyes on your long-term goals. Always be willing to adapt and grow, no matter how high you climb. Embrace failure as a learning tool. Everyone experiences failure, but ego can make it hard to accept. Instead of letting failure crush you, use it as an opportunity to learn and improve. Stay curious, stay humble, and never stop trying to get better. Put the mission above your ego. Whether you're working on a personal project or leading a team, always keep the mission at the forefront. Don't let your ego get in the way of doing what's best for the project, even if it means making tough or unpopular decisions. By applying these lessons, you'll not only avoid the traps of ego, but also unlock your full potential, staying focused and grounded as you pursue success. Thank you for completing another BrevRead video. Like and subscribe to see more of our videos. If you have a particular book that you would like us to summarize, please share it in the comments section below.